The halls beyond were nothing like the prison she had escaped. Also painted in the same boring colors, there were no heavy iron doors or Spartan cells inside. It was a proper hospital. Also no pony would ever call a hospital warm and inviting. The rooms Twilight managed to peek into were fit for a princess compared to where she had woken up. After a short distance, the doors gave way to naked windows. Twilight's heart skipped a beat, and she held back a sudden urge to cry out in relief. She could see outside. The view was expansive, rolling hills and gentle grasslands that went on for miles, all bathed in the gentle light of an early morning sunrise. A collection of unnaturally straight shadows on the horizon marked the distant town. Being able to focus on objects was a welcome treat after tight corridors and claustrophobic cells. It was beautiful and glorious and tragic. Her relief ebbed. "I want to be out of here," she sobbed with longing. "I just want to go home." Someone coughed behind her. Twilight turned her head to find Celia standing uncomfortably close, one eyebrow raised expectantly. She stared back blankly. "Keep moving," he finally said, the softness of his voice catching her off guard. With a start, Twilight realized that her face was close enough to fog the glass with her breath. "Oh, sorry," she apologized before she turned and hurried after Nurse Ratched, the stallion following behind closely. To Twilight's disappointment, the route to Dr. Rose's office necessitated turning away from the windows, but she couldn't keep a momentary grin off her face. It felt good to smile. The rest of the trip paled in comparison, a monotonous series of indistinguishable corridors and closed doors. Nurse Ratched confidently led them onward, the silence broken only by the clip-clop of the hoof on tire and a rare greeting to a passing pony. Twilight was surprised at how empty the halls seemed. Weren't hospitals supposed to be pretty busy, even early in the morning? The signs at each intersection were annoyingly generic. Examination room 301 to 309. Twilight read as she passed one by, and soon she was lost, trusting her guide to lead her out of the linoleum labyrinth. The hospital seemed endless, the many identical hallways melting together into a single long green-white blur. It was hard to stay focused as she followed behind the nurse like a faithful hound, planting one hoof in front of the other with robotic precision. She just let her thoughts wander as time dragged on. "Ah, here we are!" She snapped out of her distracted reverie. Twilight came to an awkward and sudden halt, catching herself before she stumbled blindly into Nurse Ratched's backside. Preoccupied by her thoughts, she hadn't noticed when the older mare had stopped. She tried to cover her embarrassment at being so distracted by quickly glancing around, but swiftly realized no one was looking at her. Besides, she didn't care what they thought. The only things to differentiate this hallway from any other were the pair of aged oak doors the nurse stood beside. Hanging next to the door was a brass plate with the words "Dr. Valentino Rose, M.D." etched into it. Nurse Ratched knocked politely. "Come in, come in," a voice answered. Opening the door, Nurse Ratched gently ushered Twilight into a library. Hundreds of books rested on the wooden bookshelves that covered walls on either side of the room. There was nothing in the room to suggest that minutes before she had been trapped wandering an endless patch of drab hospital corridors. Many of the books were expensively bound with the titles picked out in gold leaf. Everything was precisely arranged, not a single scroll nor paper out of place. It was incredible. A flash of jealousy at such organization instantly became a deep longing for home. Twilight's stomach nodded, hoping Spike was okay. Did her friends even know where she was? "Ah, Twilight sparkled. It's good to see you this morning," a tiny unicorn said, standing up from behind a broad mahogany desk that dominated the far end of the room. His smile matched the room, big, warm, and inviting. The light blue eyes behind his gold-rimmed spectacles and the flecks of gray in his otherwise dark brown hair suggested a distinguished scholar. His office fit him like a glove. Rounding the desk, he gestured at a couch and chairs along one wall. "Please take a seat, Twilight, and I'll be with you momentarily." Twilight nodded and shuffled forward, taking one of the well-padded chairs. Dr. Rose, a point made painfully obvious by a scarlet rose on a blue medical cross cutie mark, excused himself and joined Nurse Ratched in the hallway, pulling the door shut behind him. Whatever they said was muffled into incomprehensibility by the oak doors. Twilight was left alone with Sayers, who stood patiently by the entrance. So, Sayers, how long have you worked here? She asked politely. She was about to repeat her question when he finally answered. 7 years. Well, that's quite a long time. I bet you have seen a lot during your time here, right? There was another painfully long pause. Yes. Any, funny stories? Yes. Twilight waited expectantly for him to continue, but the orderly remained mute. She narrowed her eyes irritably. And are there any of them you would like to share? Pause. No. I figured as much, Twilight muttered as she rubbed a hoof between her eyes. She felt like a dentist having to extract every syllable against his will. Turning away from Sayers, she let her eyes wander over the rest of her surroundings. The windows behind the doctor's desk offered another welcome glimpse of the outside, but even the sight of open spaces wasn't enough of a temptation to keep her attention from turning to the many different tomes lining the walls. The titles were uniformly medical in nature. The Canterlot Journal of Public Health, Paston's Anatomy of a Troubled Mind, and the Trottingham Textbook of Cognitive Psychotherapy all shared space on the tightly packed shelves. It was very specialized literature past Twilight's own knowledge levels, but curiosity bubbled up inside her regardless. They might even contain some hint about how she had ended up here. Twilight reached out to remove one of them, but a soft curve stayed her hoof. She looked over at Sayers quizzically, but he simply shook his head. Look, but don't touch then. She pulled her foreleg back with a reluctant sigh, but continued to read the covers. She had never been in the office before, but a library was a library, and Twilight found her innate hunger for knowledge growing more powerful with every moment she spent in such familiar settings. The close proximity to so many new books was intoxicating, and she savored the untapped potential laid out before her. The muffled voices outside eventually ceased, and Twilight put her voracious gaze away from the bookshelves as Dr. Rose re-entered the room alone. Nurse Ratched was updating me on your condition, Twilight. Some temporary amnesia is a known side effect of your treatments, as I'm sure you have been told, but it seems that you are having trouble remembering this hospital and its staff. Is this true? He asked as he settled into the chair across from her, levitating a notebook and pencil before him. Yes, doctor, that's true, she said. I woke up this morning strapped to a bed. There's no memory of how I got there, or why I am even here in the first place. I felt like I was stuck in some twisted nightmare, and to make matters worse, my horn was dampened, so I couldn't even use magic. She glared enviously at the floating notebook. I've been scared and confused all morning, and no one's giving me any answers. It's hard to make sense of what's going on when you're not taught anything in the first place, and it's just needlessly cruel. Like a water balloon filled past its limit, Twilight felt fit to burst. How she had held it in for so long without exploding, she would never know. She knew she was letting her anger take hold, but being locked up and magically silenced against one's will wasn't a recipe for remaining calm. The doctor just looked at her with interest and jotted down notes, making no attempt to interrupt her. Emboldened by his silence, Twilight continued. I don't know how you might do things around here, but I've never seen such a disregard for the well-being of a patient before. Don't you understand how terrified I was? It's inexcusable. Until today, I would never have believed that in today's Equestria, a pony could be imprisoned in a hospital and then denied information. No pony has told me anything. Anything. The only thing I did learn was that I had to ask you all of my questions. So Dr. Rose, let's start with the basics. Why in the name of Celestia am I here? She spat the question with enough venom to make Sayers take a step towards them, but she didn't notice, and if she had, she wouldn't have cared. It was time to get some answers, and she wasn't going to sit around demurely while they continued to keep her in the dark. Her eyes burned with impatience as she glared at the doctor, her mind seething as he continued writing in silence. Well, Twilight, that isn't an easy question to answer, he eventually said, looking up from the notebook to meet her angry gaze. The short answer is that you are here at Broadhove Memorial because you're sick, Twilight, and we have been taking care of you. What do you mean, sick? What have I been sick with? She asked doubtfully, losing his imperturbable manners. Twilight, you are not well. We have been trying to make you better, but illnesses like yours are not easy to treat. You can fix a cut with a bandage and a little magic, but some things aren't so simple. You need lots of time and special care to get better. Stop talking to me like I'm a damn filly. I'm not a little child, Twilight snapped, leaping from her seat and jabbing one of her hoofs accusingly at the doctor. Normally, vulgar language was a sign of an inferior vocabulary, but Twilight couldn't hold herself back. She didn't want to hold back. She spotted Sayers advancing on her from the corner of her eye with a nightstick in his teeth. She sounded like a mad pony. She probably looked like a mad pony too. Flecks of spittle flew from her lips as she yelled at the doctor through bare teeth. Just give me a straight answer. I deserve that much. How am I sick? Dr. Rose halted Sayers with a gesture, meeting Twilight's angry glare with professional calm. It would have been impressive if she hadn't been ready to break his jaw. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, collecting his thoughts. Finally, he took a deep breath. Twilight, you suffer from severe schizophrenia and grandiose delusions compounded by an obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. She blinked. What? Twilight, most of your life you have been suffering from a number of severe delusions created by acute mental and personality disorders. Twilight continued to stare at the doctor as the words hung between them while her mind processed what he had just said. She breathed in deeply through her nose, taking a carefully measured breath. Then she laughed. She laughed hard. Twilight's mane joisted as she shook with a deep, full-bodied belly laugh. She plopped back down into her chair as her legs turned to rubber. She couldn't breathe. She was cramping up. She couldn't stop laughing. She did know what she had expected to hear, but she hadn't been prepared for that. Also, she had to admit, the fact that he said it with such a perfectly straight face really did impress her. He had sounded so sincere. Are you trying to tell me that I'm crazy? She wheezed and ripped a tear away from her eyes, waiting for the punchline. We don't like to use that term around here, Twilight, he said uncomfortably. We don't want our patients thinking any less of themselves just because of their illnesses. In fact, with the proper therapy and medications, most of our patients can live relatively normal lives. Twilight snorted. Please, doctor, just stop. If you had tried to tell me that I had been in a coma for a few days suffering from something like Saturday Arabian horn rot or Appaloosa fever or something even remotely possible, then I might have believed you. But while I am no doctor, I am well read. And even I know that you can't develop schizophrenia overnight. Clearing her throat, she rose to her hoofs. Now I've already received enough terror in my treatment for one day, so please forgive me if I don't want to spend any more time here. Why don't you just tell me what this is really about so I can go home? Sayers, can you fetch that folder sitting on top of my desk? He asked the orderly. Sayers hesitated, uncomfortable leaving the doctor's side. He eyed Twilight suspiciously before he turned and trotted off. Doctor, this is getting a bit embarrassing. Whatever falsified documents you have in that folder are not going to convince me that I am crazy. Sayers returned and placed a thick manila folder bursting with papers into the doctor's hoofs before retreating a few paces away. He continued to study Twilight as he took up a position nearby, prepared to intervene at a moment's notice. It was a believable performance, acting like she was some kind of a threat. She wished she was that talented an actor. A blue aura suffused Dr. Rose's horn as he quickly paged through the file's content with tendrils of magic. Pulling one stapled document free, he floated it over and deposited it in her lap. Here, Twilight. This was signed by your parents when we took you into our care. As you can see, your schizophrenia did not just appear overnight. You have been here in our care for years. Twilight huffed with annoyance as she snatched up the paper. BMPH patient registration form printed in block letters across the top of the page. Her eyes rapidly scanned from side to side as she checked and rechecked every single line. No pony spoke. A cold worm of doubt began to wriggle inside her as she scrutinized her parents' signature. They were perfect matches. She glanced up at the doctor. These are impressive forgeries, she allowed, but the dates are all wrong. This paper says I've been here since just after I took my entrance exam, and that's just impossible. For argument's sake, I'm going to ignore the fact that, until very recently, I lived disorder-free, far away from here. Now you're saying that I've been here for most of my life, but don't remember any of it because I'm suffering from some retrograde amnesia as a side effect of a treatment? Correct? Correct. She didn't have the patience for this. "Horse feathers!" she snapped. "Amnesia doesn't work that way. If I lost more than a decade of my life due to amnesia, then there would be nothing but huge gaps in my memory. But there are no gaps. None. And there are no missing links, no forgotten events, nothing. The only unanswered question, the only gap in my past, is the one between last night and this morning. And unless the next words out of your mouth are either an explanation or an apology, I'm leaving." She made as if to stand up. Dr. Rose held his gaze, deep in thought. Just as Twilight was about to make good on her threat, he started looking through the bulky folder again. "Twilight, do you remember the birthday after you took your entrance exams?" Once again, the doctor's words caught her by surprise. "Of course I do," she said. "We had a picnic just outside Canterlot. What does that have to do with anything?" "Do you remember getting your picture taken while there?" "How do you know about that?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "Twilight, do you remember?" "Yes, I remember, but how in a question would you know about that? You had better start." Twilight trailed off as Rose lifted something out of the bloated file and placed it over the registration form. It was a photograph. Twilight's blood froze in her veins. Fear and doubt began to tear at her heart as she stared down at it. How was this possible? She wanted to denounce it as another forgery and just a feeble fake, but her accusations died on her tongue. It was a photograph of 5 ponies having a picnic together. It had been taken at her birthday party, right after she had been accepted at Princess Celestia's School for Gifted Unicorns. A little filly Twilight sat between her parents and beamed up at the camera, looking ridiculous, and the carnival party had far too big for her. She had switched with her dad to get it, and even though it kept falling in front of her eyes, she had been too taken by the thought that it resembled something a wizard would wear to even consider changing back. Her big brother's shining armor and a full cedar cadence, complete with silly hats, also in more practical sizes, were there as well, smiling over at her. In Twilight's hoof there was a copy of Starsway the Bearded, a concise history. Her father's gift still partially covered with the scraps of the wrapping paper. She still had that book, the well-worn pages and damaged spine, a testament to an eager young filly's love for learning. In the middle of the blanket, the half-finished remains of her birthday cake sat, ignored by all in favor of presents. It was one of the best memories of her early years, and Twilight remembered that day perfectly. She shouldn't be looking at this picture right now. It couldn't be there, in her hooves. She could never forget the photograph, having seen it hanging on the wall of her parents' home for years. Like the events themselves, it was burned into her memory. The photograph had to be the same one. Along a corner there was the same small crease where her brother had accidentally bent it while storing it in their father's saddlebags. It even faintly smelled of her parents' home, but the picture couldn't be real. It was wrong. There were details that didn't match up with her memories. In the background, the lake where they had swum before eating had been replaced by a white multi-story building. She pulled the picture closer, and there were bags beneath her parents' eyes she did not remember. Shining Armor was still smiling happily, but Cadence looked distracted, nervous even. Everyone but Twilight was wearing a lanyard with a card on it. The writing was minuscule, and only her mother's wasn't obscured. Lifting the photograph upwards for better light, Twilight held it inches from her face and squinted, mouthing the letters out silently as she tried to read what they said. The photograph began to shake softly. "No," she whispered. It was a lie. It had to be. "Please, Twilight, I know it hurts, but you have to try and remain calm," some pony said soothingly, but Twilight didn't hear them. The photograph slipped from her senseless hoofs as she remained frozen, staring upwards at nothing through unfocused eyes. Her whole body was shaking now. She couldn't remember when she started crying. She felt like screaming. She felt like shouting. She felt like tossing the chair over and throwing herself at the doctor. He was lying. The voice said something about calming down to keep her from hyperventilating. It wasn't true. It couldn't be true. The voice grew panicked when Twilight suddenly vomited and toppled limply out of her chair, crashing to the floor with a sickening crunch. She didn't feel a thing. She was too cold, too empty, too numb to feel anything anymore. "Please don't let it be true." The others rolled her onto her side to keep her from choking while someone shouted for assistance, but Twilight was too far gone to register any of it. The picture was not edited, was not altered, and was not changed. It was fact as much as it was fiction, and Twilight struggled to separate the two concepts. The picture was a paradox. It was wrong, it was a lie, it was false, but it was real. An impossibility given form. And what it said hurt. Oh, it hurt so much. She tried to push the words out of her head, but she couldn't ignore them. It was a savage cut against her own psyche, an existential wound on her soul. Someone screamed. It might have been her. The words were so innocuous, but they pulsated like neon tumors in her mind. Visitor identification. Broadhof Memorial Psychiatric Hospital.